Okay, so let's dive in. We're tackling a topic today that sounds a bit complex, real-world data, or RWD, but it's fundamentally reshaping something really important, how we figure out if, a new medicine works and is safe.
Yeah, and how it actually gets to people.
Exactly, how it gets to the people who need it.
Right. Because for decades, the absolute, well, the gold standard, the cornerstone for proving a drug's worth, has been the randomized controlled trial, the RCT.
The RCT, yeah.
And they are incredibly powerful, don't get me wrong, for showing if a drug can work, but it's under really tightly controlled conditions.
Right, ideal conditions often. But our sources for this deep dive, they really highlight the friction points with that traditional path.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about getting kind of stuck in a system that takes maybe, 10 or 15 years?
Easily, sometimes more.
Costs billions, and frankly, the trials often recruit a very specific group of people. They don't always look like the, diverse mix you actually see in a doctor's waiting room.
That's a huge point. And just finding enough patients for those trials, especially if it's a rare condition or the criteria are super strict.
Must cause huge delays.
Massive delays. It's a real bottleneck in the whole process.
So the big idea RWD brings is, well, what is it exactly?
It's really about leveraging this immense amount of health information that's just being generated every single day.
It's automatically.
Yeah, just from people living their lives, getting routine health care. Think of it as tapping into the real-world health experience of millions.
Okay.
To make the whole process, developing, evaluating medicines faster, more representative, and ultimately more relevant to actual patients.
So our mission today, then, is to unpack how this real-world data is essentially, I guess, updating the journey from the lab bench all the way to your bedside.
Making it smarter, yeah.
Smarter and better connected to the messy reality of healthcare.
Exactly. So maybe first things first, we should make sure we're all on the same page with the terms.
Good idea. RWD and RWE.
Real-world data, RWD, and real-world evidence, RWE. What exactly are we talking about?
Well, the way the sources sort of lay it out, RWD is basically data about a patient's health status or how they receive healthcare collected routinely.
Right. Not specifically for a trial.
No, it's data from normal doctor visits, hospital stays, maybe even things you track yourself on a wearable, but collected outside of a formal research study set up for a specific drug trial. It's the data of everyday health.
And this data, it comes from all over the place. We're talking electronic health records, EHRs, those digital charts your doctor uses.
Okay.
It's claims and billing data that, gets generated every time you visit a doctor or pick up a prescription. It's patient registries for specific diseases, tracking outcomes for people with, say, cystic fibrosis or MS.
And it's getting even broader now, right?
Yeah.
Like incorporating data from wearables, smartwatches, tracking activity, sleep.
Absolutely. Pharmacy records, too. And something called patient-reported outcomes, or PROs.
PROs.
Yeah, that's literally data that patients themselves provide about their symptoms, their quality of life, how they're actually feeling, often through apps or surveys.
Wow. Okay, so it's a huge kind of sprawling ecosystem of data.
It really is.
Yeah.
And here's the crucial distinction we need to make. RWD is that raw material. It's the stream of information.
The ingredients.
Exactly, the ingredients. Now, when you take that RWD and you apply rigorous scientific methods, careful collection, management, sophisticated analysis to generate clinical insights about a medical product that is real-world evidence, RWE.
Ah, okay. So RWD is the what, RWE is the so what.
That's a great way to put it. RWE is the so what you get after applying sound research methods to the RWD.
So how does that evidence, that RWE, compare to what you get from a traditional RCT?
Yeah, this is a really key point. Traditional RCTs, they're designed to prove efficacy.
Efficacy, meaning?
Meaning whether a drug can work under those highly controlled, often ideal conditions in a very carefully selected group of patients. RWD and the RWE derived from it, on the other hand, they reflect routine clinical practice. They show effectiveness.
Effectiveness. So how it works in the real world.
Exactly. How a drug actually works in that much wider, more diverse patient population you see every day with all their other health conditions, other medications, life circumstances, all that messiness. RWD gives us that broader, more realistic picture.
Okay, so that makes sense. How is this real-world picture starting to change the actual process then? Running clinical trials. This is where the rubber meets the road, I guess.
It really is, and it's starting to impact trials across their entire life cycle. Let's think about the very beginning, the design phase, even before a single patient is enrolled.
Patient recruitment always sounds like a massive headache. That seems like a prime area RWD could help.
Oh, absolutely. Finding the right patients can be incredibly slow, incredibly expensive,
Huh.
but by analyzing RWD things like de-identified data from EHRs or disease registries,
De-identified meaning privacy is protected.
critically important, yes. Patient information is scrubbed of identifying details. But by analyzing that data, researchers can identify potentially eligible patients much, much faster and more precisely than just, casting a wide net.
Right.
Imagine trying to find just a handful of patients scattered across the globe for a trial on a very rare genetic disease.
Yeah, impossible almost.
Well, querying these large de-identified databases can actually help pinpoint those patients much more efficiently.
And what about choosing where to even run the trial? The
Right.
locations?
RWD helps with site selection too. You can analyze data to find hospitals or clinics that already treat a high volume of patients with the condition you're studying,
Okay.
places that have the right research infrastructure, maybe even a track record of successfully running trials. You're basically placing your trial where it has the best chance of finding patients and running smoothly.
It feels like it could also change what you even measure in a trial, like the outcomes you focus on.
Definitely. RWD, especially those patient-reported outcomes we mentioned, gives you insights into what actually matters most to patients in their daily lives.
Beyond just the lab results.
Exactly. Beyond just blood pressure numbers or tumor shrinkage, it helps researchers select trial endpoints that incorporate things like quality of life, functional ability, how bothersome certain symptoms are, things that real people care about and that are often captured in RWD.
I've also heard something about RWD making trial designs more flexible, this idea of adaptive trials.
That's right. RWD is enabling more flexible and innovative trial structures. A really compelling example is using RWD to create what are called external or historical control arms.
Okay, what does that mean?
So instead of enrolling patients into a placebo group or a group getting the current standard treatment within your new trial.
Which takes time and resources.
Right. You can compare the outcomes of patients getting the new drug in your trial to a group of similar patients identified from existing RWD, patients who, in the past, received the standard care for that condition.
So you're essentially creating a virtual control group from past data.
Precisely. And this is hugely valuable, especially, again, for studying rare diseases where finding enough patients for two separate trial arms is nearly impossible.
Or maybe situations where it feels unethical to give some patients a placebo.
Exactly that. If you have a severe, life-threatening condition, giving a placebo when a potentially effective treatment exists is a major ethical challenge. Historical controls using RWD can sometimes help address that.
That seems to link up with this other concept mentioned in the source's pragmatic clinical trials,
Yeah.
PCTs.
Yes, exactly. PCTs are designed specifically to evaluate interventions as they would actually be used in real-world settings.
Not the idealized setting of an RCT.
Correct. With diverse patient populations often integrated directly in a routine clinical care, and RWD sources like EHRs are absolutely essential to making PCTs work.
How so?
They help identify and recruit the patients. The intervention itself might be delivered just as part of normal care, and then the outcome data, did it work, is collected directly from those RWD sources.
The recovery trial during the COVID-19 pandemic gets mentioned as a big example here.
It really showcased the power of this pragmatic RWD-enabled approach. That trial managed to rapidly test multiple potential COVID treatments by embedding the research within the existing UK National Health Service data infrastructure.
Wow.
It just demonstrated how RWD can make these large-scale effectiveness studies incredibly fast and feasible compared to building a traditional trial entirely from scratch.
You also touched on that virtual control group idea. There's a specific term for that too, isn't there? Synthetic control arms.
Yes, that's a particularly innovative application that's gaining a lot of traction. The idea is to use RWD to construct a control arm virtually, without actually enrolling any new patients into a separate control group for comparison.
Okay, but how do you make sure that virtual group is genuinely comparable to the patients getting the new drug? That seems tricky.
It is tricky, and it requires very careful methodology. You have to meticulously select patients from large RWD sources like EHR databases or claims data whose baseline characteristics match the patients in your single treatment group.
Baseline characteristics like?
Things like age, sex, their other health conditions, the severity of their disease before treatment started.
Yeah.
You need them to look as similar as possible on paper to the group getting the new drug.
Okay.
And Then you use advanced statistical methods, sometimes AI and machine learning, to carefully compare the outcomes between your trial patients and this synthetically constructed matched RWD group.
That sounds like it could seriously speed things up and maybe lower the cost.
It absolutely can, quite significantly. It accelerates trial timelines, reduces the operational costs of running a large control arm, and crucially, it minimizes the number of patients who need to be randomized to a placebo or standard of care group.
Which, as you said, is a huge ethical plus for patients with serious conditions.
A huge benefit. And we're seeing regulatory agencies becoming more open to this approach, showing increasing acceptance, particularly in areas like rare diseases or certain types of cancer, where the need for new treatments is high, and running traditional trials is especially difficult.
And it feels like RWD could also help tackle that persistent issue we mentioned earlier, clinical trials not always being diverse enough, not reflecting the real patient population.
That's a major critique of traditional RCTs, and rightly so. The very strict inclusion and exclusion criteria often mean that certain patient groups just get left out.
Like older adults.
Yeah.
Or people with multiple health problems.
Exactly. Older adults, people with multiple chronic conditions, sometimes certain racial and ethnic minorities, they're often underrepresented in trials. But RWD, by its very nature, captures data from these diverse populations because they are receiving routine care every day.
So analyzing that RWD can give us insights into how a disease actually manifests or how a treatment performs in these groups that might have been excluded from the main trials.
Precisely. And that knowledge can then feed back to inform the design of future trials, helping make them more inclusive from the start.
Or the evidence itself could be used.
Yes, or the RWE generated from these diverse groups can supplement the data from the RCTs. It provides valuable evidence on generalizability, does the drug work well across the board, and helps researchers and regulators understand if the treatment is safe and effective for a wider range of patients. This is really essential if we want to address health disparities and work towards health equity.
Okay, so beyond just changing how trials are designed and run, RWD is also influencing how medicines actually get approved and how we sort of keep an eye on them once they're out in the real world.
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly valuable for regulatory decision-making. Now, RCTs are still typically required for that initial drug approval you need to demonstrate basic efficacy and safety.
The gold standard still holds for that first step.
Generally, yes. But RWD is being used more and more to provide supportive evidence in regulatory submissions. It adds context.
Where is it adding that extra layer of support most often?
Particularly for things like getting approval for a new use for an existing drug, maybe for a different patient population. They call those label expansions.
Okay.
Or sometimes for entirely new indications for drugs that are already on the market for something else. And in certain cases, especially with rare diseases where those large RCTs just aren't feasible, RWE from sources like patient registries or EHRs can actually form a significant part of the evidence package that regulators review alongside smaller traditional studies.
So the regulators like the FDA or the EMA in Europe, they're actively building this into their process. They're expecting this now.
They are. Agencies like the FDA and EMA have been developing specific frameworks and guidance documents for how to use RWD and RWE appropriately. It signals their growing acceptance and outlines how this data can be used responsibly in submissions. They've even set targets for greater integration, looking towards 2025.
And then once a drug is approved, and potentially millions of people are using it, RWD becomes absolutely vital for safety monitoring, right? Post-market surveillance.
It's indispensable there, absolutely indispensable. Pre-market trials, even large ones, might not pick up on very rare side effects.
Things that only happen in 1 in 100,000 people.
Exactly. Or side effects that only appear after someone's been taking the drug for years, or maybe only in specific subgroups of patients. RWD systems allow us to continuously analyze data from millions of patients in the real world.
So you can spot potential problems faster.
Much earlier than traditional methods, potentially. It allows regulators to identify potential safety signals sooner.
The FDA's Sentinel initiative is a big example here, the sources mentioned.
Sentinel is a prime example, yes. It uses RWD from massive administrative claims databases and electronic health record systems to actively monitor the safety and effectiveness of medical products already on the market.
So they're constantly watching the data.
Actively watching. It allows them to rapidly investigate potential concerns and take timely regulatory action if needed, maybe updating a drug's label, or in rare cases, even pulling a product. And RWE in this post-market phase also helps us understand other things, like how a drug is really being used.
Like, are people taking it consistently?
Yeah, adherence. Or is it being used off-label for conditions it wasn't approved for? And importantly, how does its effectiveness compare to other treatments being used for the same condition in routine clinical practice? RWE helps answer those questions too.
Are there any recent concrete examples where RWE has really played a role?
Yes, the sources mention a few areas, for instance, RWE supporting approvals for some advanced oncology treatments, particularly those targeting specific genetic markers identified through EHR data.
Ah, interesting.
And also its absolutely critical role in monitoring the safety of new vaccines and novel biologic therapies after they've been rolled out to the wider population, like we saw with the COVID vaccines.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly promising, almost transformative. But obviously, dealing with this kind of messy real-world data can't be straightforward.
Yeah.
What are the big hurdles, the challenges?
Oh, there are definitely significant challenges to overcome. A major one is simply the quality and the validity of the data itself.
Because it wasn't collected for research initially.
Exactly. It was collected for patient care or for billing purposes. So it can have issues missing information, inaccuracies, different doctors or hospitals might code the same condition or treatment in inconsistent ways. It requires a huge amount of effort, rigorous curation, cleaning, validation to make sure the data is actually reliable and fit for purpose for research. You can't just take it at face value.
And just getting all these different systems to talk to each other must be a nightmare. Interoperability.
Interoperability and standardization are huge issues. Data lives in countless different EHR systems, hospital databases, patient registries, and they often don't use the same formats, the same codes. They might not even define medical terms in exactly the same way.
So trying to combine data is hard.
It's incredibly difficult to pool it all together and analyze it meaningfully. There are ongoing initiatives like promoting common data models, OOP is one you hear about, or data exchange standards like FHIR.
Like building universal translators for health data.
Kind of, yeah. Trying to create standardized structures and languages so data can be shared and understood more easily. But there's still a long, long way to go for widespread adoption and true interoperability.
And data privacy and security. That has to be absolutely paramount when you're dealing with sensitive patient information.
Non-negotiable, utterly critical. We're dealing with highly sensitive personal health information here. So you need robust methods for de-identification, secure data environments where the analysis happens, and strict adherence to regulations like Healthepi in the US or GDPR in Europe.
And maintaining public trust is key.
Foundational. People need to trust that their data is being used responsibly and ethically for research that ultimately benefits society. Without that trust, the whole system breaks down.
And then the science itself. Analyzing this observational real-world data. It's not as straightforward as analyzing data from a randomized trial, is it?
No. The methodological rigor required is complex and really critical. Unlike in an RCT where patients are randomly assigned to groups, which helps balance out differences.
Right, randomization is key.
In the real world, patients aren't randomized. This introduces potential biases that you have to account for. For example, patients who choose to take a new drug might be inherently different, maybe healthier, maybe sicker than those who don't. That's selection bias.
Okay.
Or other factors might be influencing the outcomes besides the treatment itself. That's confounding. Drawing reliable conclusions, especially causal inferences, saying the drug caused the outcome from observational RWD, requires really sophisticated epidemiological and biostatistical methods to try and adjust for these potential biases. It's not simple.
And finally, just navigating the regulatory landscape. Is it clear yet how this RWE to be used?
Well, the expectations for how RWE can be used are still evolving globally. While there's definitely growing acceptance, researchers and the industry still need clearer, perhaps more harmonized guidance from regulatory agencies around the world.
On exactly when and how RWE is appropriate.
Yeah, exactly when and how it can appropriately support different types of decisions, from informing trial design to supporting label expansions, maybe even contributing to initial approvals in some cases. More clarity and consistency would be helpful.
So tackling all these challenges, data quality, interoperability, privacy, methods, regulation. It really needs everyone pulling in the same direction.
Precisely. It requires real collaboration. Researchers, data scientists, clinicians, patients themselves, the pharmaceutical industry, technology providers, regulators, everyone has a role to play.
So looking ahead then, is RWD just going to completely replace the traditional clinical trial, the RCT?
You know, that's the key takeaway for the future. RWD is generally not seen as a replacement for RCTs, especially for that initial demonstration of whether a drug works effectively and safely.
So it's not either.
No, the future is very clearly hybrid. It's synergistic, It's about leveraging the distinct strengths of both approaches.
Okay, so how do they work together best in this vision?
Well, RCTs remain the gold standard for establishing that initial cause and effect relationship, proving efficacy under controlled conditions. That's their strength.
Okay.
Then RWD comes in to complement that. It provides the real-world context.
Filling in the gaps.
Exactly. It can help inform and optimize the design of those RCTs in the first place, making them more efficient, maybe more representative. And then critically, it provides crucial complementary evidence on things RCTs often aren't great at capturing,
Like long-term effects.
like long-term effectiveness over
Yeah.
many years, the safety profile in truly diverse populations, people with multiple health issues who wouldn't get into a typical trial, or how a treatment compares head-to-head against other treatments being used in routine practice.
And it fills those evidence gaps where maybe running an RCT just isn't feasible or ethical.
Absolutely. It provides a way to learn in situations where RCTs aren't practical.
So the overall vision is more of a connected, continuous learning process.
Yes, I think that's the goal. An ecosystem where insights gleaned from RWD help us design smarter, better RCTs. And then the results from those RCTs are continuously expanded upon and contextualized by RWD, generated from real-world use after the drug is approved.
Creating a feedback loop.
Exactly. A learning health system where data from patient care constantly feeds back to improve research, which then improves treatment and so on. More efficient, more comprehensive, and ultimately more patient-centric.
And technology must play a huge role here. AI.
Oh, absolutely. Advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, these tools are only going to become more vital for managing these massive, complex RWD data sets, analyzing them effectively, and extracting meaningful evidence.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up then. We've taken a pretty deep dive into how real-world data is truly acting as, well, a game changer in the world of clinical trials and how new medical products get developed and monitored.
Yeah, it's helping us move beyond some of those historical limitations of traditional research. The really long timelines, the huge costs, the challenge of truly representing the full diversity of patients
Toward something more efficient.
towards a research landscape that's potentially more efficient, definitely more inclusive, and more closely aligned with the realities of everyday healthcare.
So by responsibly and intelligently using this wealth of data that's generated from routine care, the hope is we can accelerate the development and approval of safe, effective treatments.
Yes, and gain a deeper understanding of how they actually perform in the messy real world, keep a more vigilant eye on safety once they're in wide use.
And ultimately help ensure that new therapies benefit a much broader, more diverse range of patients.
Which, at the end of the day, translates into the potential for better health outcomes for you, for everyone. Faster access to medical innovations when they're truly needed.
And contributing to a healthcare system that's constantly learning and improving based on actual experience.
Exactly, a continuously learning health system.
Now, the journey to fully harness RWD is clearly still ongoing. There are challenges to address, more innovation definitely ahead. But given all the potential benefits and the complexities we've discussed, here's maybe something for you, the listener, to consider based on our sources. How can you, whether you're a patient whose data might be part of this system, maybe you're a researcher, a healthcare professional, or just simply an informed individual, how can you best participate in championing the responsible and effective use of real-world data to improve health for everyone? What role could you play in fostering this future?